Okay, hello everyone. Let's start week 4 lecture of project management from work. In today's lecture, we are going to discuss about create project budget and project procurement plan, learn how to create and modify project schedule, and learn how to develop communication, quality management, and resource management plan. So these are the 3 objectives that we are going to go through that in today's lecture. So first of all, with project budget. So project budget should be a realistic estimation of total costs to complete the project successfully. If you are optimistic and put limited budget, the project may not be delivered and may not provide the financial benefits. On the other hand, if you are also pessimistic, so you consider a lot of budget for the project, it may not be financially viable to go ahead because the stakeholders may say that this is too much budget. We cannot allow that much budget for this project, and return on investment may not be sufficient in order to do that. So in terms of the project budget to be realistic, so cost estimates will be calculated based on the work breakdown structure, which I discussed what is the work breakdown structure in the previous lecture. And based on that, you can get an realistic estimation of project budget and use that project budget during the project and apply any necessary changes when it's required. So there are few types of budgeting items that you need to consider when you're preparing a budget for your project. One can be direct cash cost, which is going to be paid to the vendors or contractors. So from the contracts, you know exactly how much you need to pay those vendors. So this is something that you know the start of the project or during the project, or you have some expectation that how much money you're gonna spend on that. There are some indirect labor costs. It's also known as burden or in-kind cost, which is for the current employee's salary and benefits. The reason is because it's indirect. You're already paying those staff as a part of the organization, but you're using some of their time for a particular project. So it means that you don't need to have a specific budget to pay for those staff, but the time that you're using from their salary is going to be contributed as a kind of a budget because still someone is going to pay those staff for their time. You also got time-based resources, which is going to be rental equipment. So you rent equipment for a period of time, can be a week, can be a month, can be a quarter, and also office lease, which can be direct or indirect. Direct means that for a particular project, you need a location that for duration of that project, you rent that office, or it can be a warehouse or another kind of location that you rent for your project. Or it can be indirect, the office that you're currently using and the staff is currently using as part of the organization, but you contribute some of that as a time-based resources for the project. So if all the staff in that office are working on a single project, then perhaps all the rent that you're paying for that office can be contributed to that project. But if all the staffs in that building are going to work on different projects, then it's going to be budgeted proportionally on the type of the budget, type of the projects, and the length of the project that they are working at the same time. The other budget item can be materials, can be equipment, some permanent equipment that you buy and you use for that project, but you also return it for any potential other project or for continuous use after finishing the project. That is permanent equipment, also construction materials, consumables, and any other materials that's going to be consumed as a part of that project. You got also some ancillary costs, can be travel. Sometimes you need to travel, for example, site visits or going to customer location that is in another state or another country. and also some training fees that you need to pay for training a staff, especially if the staffs are inexperienced, then you need to allow for that, and some other fees that you need to pay. Okay, the labor costs. The major task in creating the budget is estimating the cost for each of the project's work elements. So we got a work breakdown structure, and you need to allow resources for each work element that you specified in the work breakdown structure. And cost of each resources is estimated based on that. An example of that is can be you got a work element that requires 25 hours of casual work. So you got a plumbing job that you know that it can take, based on the consultation, it can take 25 hours of work, and the technician is paid $17.5 per hour. Probably the plumber gets much higher than that, but let's assume. And you got also overheads. So overheads here are 84%. So you know what to mean by the overhead here? Nope. Anyone that knows what do we mean by the overhead and risk? Yep. Okay. Overhead. So not particularly correct the thing that you mentioned. So let me explain what do we mean by overheads. So overheads in a when you design a project budget, sometimes you need to contribute some of the things that we mentioned that are indirect costs, for example, in-kind time of personnel or office space, or even the revenue of the company that needs to be included in that, and also some other people that may help with the project. So all these things can be considered as overhead. So you pay the 17.5 hour to the technician, but the rest is going to be absorbed for something else that you pay in a long term. It can also be like an insurance or those kind of things that you not particularly pay for this particular jobs, but for any jobs that you do, for any projects that you do, you need to consider these overheads. And these overheads is actually, for example, paying your rent office, paying your electricity bill, paying your gas bill, water bill, and those kind of things. So you cannot exactly say that how much percentage you need to consider, but organization mainly have some percentage of overheads. So this 84% perhaps in the higher range, it can be between from 30%, 20%, up to 100%. And this is based on the organizations, can be different. Okay, so when you, and these overheads are going to normally apply for any cost elements. So no matter if it's going to paying for the labor or paying for the materials, normally the overhead can apply for the total cost of the project. But in some organization, it may be different. They only apply overheads for a particular jobs, but not all the jobs. Okay. So in this particular example, we got 25 hours multiplied by 17.5 per hour for this technician, and we got 84% overhead, which means that we need to add another 0.84. So it's going to be multiplied by 1.84. And the total budget for this job is going to be $805. So there are different ways that we can do the budget. One way is a top-down budgeting. So top-down budgeting, the top manager estimate and decide on the overall budget of the project. One example of that is you want to do a renovation for your house and you specified like 50K or 100K to do this particular job. And this is going to be your budget. So what you do next, then you specify how much of that budget goes, for example, to renovating a kitchen, how much of that is going to go to renovate the toilets, and how much of that is going to go to do some landscaping and gardening for you. So you're, as the manager, as the owner, you decide how much budget do you want to spend on this project and how it's going to be broken into different tasks. So the top manager decides overall budget, and then this trickle down through the organization where the estimates are broken down into greater detail at each lower level. For each particular task or particular task summary, how much you are going to spend. And the process continues to the bottom level. So after you got some deliverables that you need to achieve, and for each you specify how much budget you specify, and even then for each deliverables and milestone, you got some works elements that you need to be done, and based on that you specify how much of that budget goes to each work elements. And this is goes down on until you got a specific budget for each work element. Okay, so this is one way of doing budgeting. From your point of view, what is the advantages of this top-down budgeting? What are the benefits of the top-down budgeting? Early and fast, can be controlled by manager. You have a limit, so you know that how much you're gonna spend. Yep, work will be divided, the control becomes easy. Yep, somehow. Manager can divide, so he will be responsible for breakdown counts and easy to control. Yep, those are some of the benefits. What about the disadvantages? What are the disadvantages of having the top-down budgeting? Could be underestimated. Yeah, that's right. Team is not involved, so the estimation may be incorrect. Yep, missing concept and lower level payment, lack of accuracy. All good. So let me go through the advantages and disadvantages. So first of all, one of the biggest advantages of top-down budgeting, the project budget is capped. So you know exactly how much you're gonna spend on this particular project. And also management has more control over budget. So they know where the money is going to spend on which task, and not much detail required for budgeting. So you don't need perhaps to get a code or detailed budgeting for each elements and work hours, etc., to calculate it. So you just get a rough estimate on how much money is going to be spent based on perhaps your previous experience. So you need to have some kind of previous experience in order to do the top-down budgeting. And the work needs to be to some extent similar to the work that you've done before in order to have a good top-down budgeting. But the disadvantages is going to be lead to competition for larger shares of budget among different work groups. So this is a tricky one because you specify budget for different work, but you may specify more for some work and specify less. And the people with less budget, they may complain. They cannot do the work with that amount of budget, and they may compare it with another group and saying that specify a lot of budget to other groups for their work, but we are lacking budget in order to do our work. So these kind of things also may happen, which is uh, not going to be helpful for your project. And also, the senior manager has a strong bias toward underestimating the cost. So most of the time, the top-down budgeting underestimate the overall cost of the project, and that can end up be a problem with the project manager to manage the project with a limited budget. So another way of doing that is a bottom-up budgeting. So bottom-up budgeting, it means that low-level managers or team members price out each work package. And the initial estimates are made in terms of resources, for example, how many labor hours are required for a specific task and how much materials do we need. And these are later converted to dollar equivalents. So for example, as we had an example, we need 25 hours of work for a plumber, and this is the rate, and this is the um, that amount of the money that we need to put as the overhead. And these are also calculated for each work package and also any material that we need for doing that project. So for each work package, we got the budget that we need. And the resulting task budget are aggregated to give the total direct cost of the project. So each task summary got a few work elements, and for each work element, you calculate how much budget is required, and then you just sum it up. And for each summary task, you got all the budget that is required, and then you aggregate all the budget required for all the summary tasks, and that gives you the total budget that's required. And overhead and profits are added to develop the budget. And at the end, you also, if you didn't calculate the overhead for each specific work element, you can calculate it at the end. So you get the net budget at the beginning, and then you add overhead, which is going to percentage of that on top of it, and also any profits that you want to take, and then that it gives you the total budget. Okay, so what are the advantages of bottom-up budgeting compared to top-down budgeting? Yeah, it's more accurate. Yet team can also participate, which is good. So then after the budget is done, perhaps they are more happy with the budget that is allocated to them. So this is going to be less conflict. It's going to be more realistic and sometimes optimistic. More precisely controlled. Yep, all of that is true. So what about the disadvantages? Are there any disadvantages for bottom-up budgeting? Yep. So it can be a wish list for asking a lot of money. Time required. So you need to spend a lot of time for get the budget done, and it's more complex. It can also overestimate the budget. Yep. All that are good. So let's go through the advantages and disadvantages. First of all, it's more likely to catch unusual expenses by low-level managers because they know what exactly they want to do, and they can have a better and much accurate estimation of the costs. Individuals closer to the work have more accurate idea of resource requirement than their superiors. That is correct. So maybe the manager, the last time that he's done the detailed budgeting, it's been few years, so they're not up to date in terms of the cost. So the low-level managers or team members can have a better estimation of the cost involved for each work package. What about disadvantages? Lower level managers tend to overstate their budget requirement, and this tends to happen most of the time. Management tends to cut the budget. So although that low level managers and team members ask for some kind of budget, but at the end, management can also cut the budget. So this is another disadvantage. Also, senior managers see the bottom-up process risky and cannot trust the ambitious subordinates who may overstate resources requirement. So at the end, because the senior managers decide on the final budget, so using the bottom-up budgeting may end up like they don't agree with the budget. So it means that a lot of time has been done, but at the end, it doesn't get approval. So it can be another disadvantages. So this is kind of a joke about bottom-up budgeting, asking the manager asks give me your best guess. And the employer says so I should make up a number so I can get approval to do the cost benefit analysis and see what the numbers should have been. But the manager saying, right, but first you need to get my approval to do the cost benefit analysis. The employee says, will you approve it? And the manager say, I'd have to see the numbers. So it's kind of like egg and chicken play that sometimes for budgeting happens. Okay, so let's see that how it's going to look like in terms of the top-down and bottom-up budgeting when you compare it to each other. So for top-down, first of all, you know that the total, the budget that is going to be spent, and based on that, you can proportionally allocate it to different items. So for example, item 1, 20%, item 2, 50%, item 3, 20%, and so on. And based on the total budget that you have, we can say like item 1, we can spend 100,000 and the same for the rest. In the bottom up, you calculate the cost for each item, for example, 10,000 for item 1, 15,000 for item 2, etc. And then you sum up all this budget to get the total budget that you need. So bottom up is mainly used for smaller projects because for very big project, it's going to perhaps takes a lot of time in order to get the budget for each single task. But and top down is going to be used for much bigger project, for example, government project. So for example, you've seen the budget probably last night from Australian government. They say like they want to spend that amount of money on infrastructure, that amount of money on that, and then it's going to be allocated into different section as per direction that they provide later. I get back to your question, Muzaffar, shortly. So as a PM, which method of budgeting you would use? Top down, bottom up, depends on the project nature. So Kangjun asking, can mid-level manager price out of resources at first? Yes, if they do that, it's going to be bottom-up process in terms of the budgeting. Okay, majority of you saying that it depends on the project nature, which is a correct answer, because if it's as I mentioned, if it's a very big project, perhaps maybe top down is going to be more appropriate. The smaller project, bottom up, is going to be more appropriate. And sometimes, let me find my mouse. Sometimes you do a combination of both, as Muzaffar asked. So you can have estimation using bottom-up method, and you can call it, for example, R, and also an estimation using the top-down method, like R capital. Both are prepared and compared, and normally the top-down budget is going to be much less than the bottom-up because jobs looks easier to superior. Superior doesn't know or forgotten the details. And also there are underestimation due to wishful thinking. And on the other hand, in the bottom up, the subordinates can overestimate. So any differences can be negotiated. But again, this is going to be very time consuming process. So if you got a very big project with a lot of work elements, or your scope is not clear at the time of the budgeting, then perhaps this is going to takes a lot of time. So in that way, probably the top-down method is going to be more helpful. There are some tools to match the higher project budget with allocated money. So one thing that you can do is just eliminate non-essential expenses. So there are some expenses that you can cut. For example, some travels that can be cut, which is not necessary. So you can just have like an online meeting. So you can reduce the budget if your estimation is too high from the allocated budget. You can also use less expensive resources. Sometimes you don't need to, for example, have an architect. You can just, the work can be done by a draft person, which they can charge much lower than the architect. Sometimes you can cut the scope if it makes sense. So some of the work is probably extra that which we can achieve your objectives and your main goal by just removing those parts from the scope. So you can also do that in order to reduce the budget. You can also ask for money, but seriously, there you're not gonna get it most of the time. But feel free to ask. What else can you do? Is there anything else you think that it can be done in order to match the higher project budgets with allocated money or reduce the cost and reduce the budgets? Having an investment portfolio, like you mean that's like uh, get the return from that portfolio in order to pay for the budget? Yeah, that can work. Banks funding. So this is are asking for more money, so which means that you need to also pay interest rate, and you need to see that the return from this project is going to cover the interest rate that you're paying or not. Communication. So what do you particularly mean by communication? Use efficient time strategies. Yeah, that's another thing. I'll discuss that later. Relocate labor resources. Uh, you mean that outsourcing? Yeah, outsourcing. If you mean outsourcing, yes, that can be another thing. So you can outsource some of the tasks that is being done with many organizations. So you outsource the labor force when it's applicable. So, for example, for construction, you cannot do it, but for a call center, you can outsource the staff from somewhere else with lower salary. Resource management, find white knight. White knight is good idea. What is white knight? Efficient management and labor, hire equipment instead of buying it. That's right. Okay, yep, I asked the same question. Okay, what should you avoid? Is there anything that you definitely need to avoid, although it's tempting in order to cut the budget and cut the cost? Yep, compromise on quality. Definitely, that is very important. So you need to do all the due diligence in order if you want to get some work done. For example, the contractors or any material that you want to do for the project. So it doesn't mean like if you can get it cheaper, it's going to be good. Sometimes you need to redo it, and it's incur a lot of costs, and also your reputation is on the line. So you need to avoid it. Taking unnecessary risk, yeah. Also taking risk, for example, maybe getting money with very high interest rate that you cannot probably pay back. That is another thing. Avoid overheads. Yeah, that's right. So if possible, not for all projects it's possible to cut the overheads, but if it's any possibility in general, it's good to cut the overhead. So you would be more efficient in terms of doing the project with less cost, and you will be more competitive. Yeah, outsourcing that we just mentioned. Anything outsourcing to foreign subcontractors with lower labor cost. Outsourcing is good, but it's also you need to do all the due diligence in order to make sure that you're outsourcing it to trusted uh, workers and trusted organization, because otherwise there might be some breach of security and information which you don't want to have that. Anything related to safety, yes, we need to avoid anything that is going to compromise the safety with high risk. So this is another thing that we need to avoid. And also avoiding rework, that's right. So anything that perhaps, although it can cost a budget, but in the later time we need to redo it the job again. At the end, it's going to increase the budget, which is something that we should avoid. Spending on compensation cost. Not sure exactly what you mean. If you can turn on your mic, Muzaffar, if you want to provide more explanation, or you can just type it in the chat box. So avoiding the track of your initial estimate values, yeah, that's it goes to the project monitoring and control at a later stage. Yep, that's something that you need to have a track. But now you're talking about the stage of the project planning. Okay, so that was about the budget. So any question, please let me know or put on a Slido. I will get back to it. Let me also log in into my Slido so I can see that if you have any question. Okay, all good. So the next thing that we need to discuss is the procurement plan. So the procurement plan defines the product and services that will be obtained from external suppliers. Sometimes you can't have, you already have the products, or your current staff can provide you with the thing that you want, but sometimes you need to outsource that from other people outside your company, or get the products from someone else. So there are a process, the 4 steps process that you need to follow. First of all, you need to identify purchase needs. So what kind of materials, consumable, equipment, or even human resources you need to do a particular job. The second step is going to be the documenting of the procurement process. For example, who handled the procurement process and how selecting vendors and managing contractors will be proceed. Most organizations already have a procurement process that it can be used. After that, you need to describe the make or buy decision process. It's something like the selection criteria. What causes to prefer outsourcing versus in-house making, and what are the requirements? And also, you need to provide a list of. Can you please mute yourself? Thank you. Uh, okay, let me mute. Okay, so describe the make or buy decision, which we discussed, and also a list of potential vendors, criteria for researching and developing the list. That is another thing that you need to have in terms of your procurement plan. So the first step is the request for proposal or solicitation. So you need to describe the scope of service, what services or resources or material you required, and then implementation deadline, when it's going to be needed, and the budget, how much budget is available for this service. Not particularly when you ask for this proposal, people may provide different budgets, but you say you provide the caps, so they cannot put a budget that is over your estimation. They can, but probably they get a very low score and they may not get selected. The other thing is evaluation criteria. So top vendors will be selected based on this criteria, for example, experience, warranty period, deliver time, quality of jobs, etc. It's like a selection criteria, like for job application. And you got the proposal requirements, what to include for submission, for example, cover letter, previous implementation, those kind of thing. For example, again, like job application, when you send your resume and cover letter, etc. And there is a submission deadline, which by then you need to, any potential vendors need to submit their application. And you also specify when the contract will be granted if successful. The next step, you're going to evaluate based on the selection criteria that you provided. So it can be, so you can score it from 1 to 5, or this is just a template. It can be any other template. So the timeline of deliveries, if it's going to be delivered very soon, you probably get a very high score. If it's get delayed, so for example, coming from overseas, you can get lower score. Quality of service, credit rating, quality of design, technical support, and level of expertise. So based on all the selection criteria and evaluation criteria, you can just give a score for each vendors after they submitted their application, and you give the contract to the vendor with the highest or score. And after you get your vendor, you start the contracts, and the contract typically includes the statement of work, what needs to be included, like a scope of jobs, and terms and conditions. For example, if something's happened, what's going to be the some legal terms, and also what's going to be delivered at the end of this contract, and what is going to be deadline, and the price of contract that you're going to pay the vendor after delivering the objectives. So that was about the procurement plan. So if you have any question about procurement, please let me know. Otherwise, we can move on with the project schedule. Okay, what is the project schedule? Project schedule, you got all the WBS, work breakdown and structure, all the work elements that needs to be done. Then you need to find a sequence in terms of the timeline that all these tasks needs to be done by the end of the project. So use a network diagram in order to find all the task dependencies. And by task dependency, we mean that one task or predecessor controls the timing of another task, which we call it the successor. So this is an example here. We got a start and end of the project, and you got time for each task. So this is in number of weeks. For example, we got 5 activities to finish this project. And for example, activity 1 has got 5 weeks to finish. Activity 2 is 1 week, and activity 3, 1 weeks to finish. And also the time period to finish activity 4 and 5 is provided. So let's start with activity 1. This is the first activity that you need to start. And after finishing of activity 5, which takes 5 days, then you can start activity 2 and activity 5 in order to complete the project. But activity 3, you can start it at the same time as activity 1. As you can see, there is no task dependencies. There is no arrow between them. So at the start of the project, if you got the resources, you can start activity 3 at the same time of activity 1. But activity 4 needs to be started after completion of activity 3, and the same thing for activity 5. Activity 5 has got two predecessors, which is activity 1 and activity 4, which means that both activity 1 and activity 4 needs to be completed before starting activity 5. And when activity 5 and activity 2 is finished, it means that your project is completed. There is something also saying about the critical path, which is you can see these bold arrows here. I'll discuss and explain critical paths later. So what's the difference between free float and total float? That is, we are going to discuss in a few minutes. Just hang on, please. Okay, so type of task dependency. First of all, the most common one is finish to start. So you need to complete a task before starting another task. A good example of that is going to building a prototype before testing it. So if you don't build it, you cannot test it. So this task needs to be finished before the second task, which is testing, to be started. Finish to finish is another thing that finishing of one task controls the finishing of the other task. For example, testing a final product and final modification should be finished at the same time. So in this particular thing, finish to finish, it doesn't matter which task you start first, but the both need to finish at the same time. So for example, here we can start your modification and then testing it, or you can test it and then modify it and then again test it. But the testing and modification should be finished at the same time. So a start to start is another thing. So a start of one activity initiate another activity. So for example, painting of interior walls can be started as soon as dry plasterboard are being installed. So you don't need to wait until all plasterboard are installed to start painting. As soon as you got some of the plasterboard are installed, so then perhaps you can start painting of them. So which call it the start to start, which both tasks can start at the same time or probably with some lag time. Another task dependency which is not common is start to finish, which means that one task need to be started before another task can be finished. One example of that can be like a shift work. So the person in the second shift need to start his work before the first one, before the person in the first shift finish his work. That is going to be another task dependency. It's not common, so don't rely on that at all, because this is something that perhaps it happens in a limited project, or you know it's very hard to see it in the project management. Okay. After you got all the task dependencies and timeline, so you know exactly how much, that how long it's going to take for each task to be finished, but you just put it as task dependency, and based on that, you got timeline of the project, and you know exactly how much is going to be the project duration. After that, you assign resources to tasks. So resources or staff and budget will be assigned to each work package. So the time of a staff can affect the budget that is required, and also some other things like material and equipment would be extra for the budget. The example of for a start to start looks like finish to start one. Not necessarily, for example, to finish to start one, so you can finish a task and have like a 10 weeks of not doing anything and then start another task. But to start to finish to start, a start to finish, a start to start means that both tasks need to start at the same time. So this is the difference. Or when one task is started, another task can be started as well. So resources you will assign to each work package, and also don't assign resources to summary tasks or milestone lists for small projects. So you got the summary task that includes a lot of tasks that needs to be done, um, but it's better, especially for bigger projects, to assign resources and budget for each particular task rather than assigning a group of people to a summary task and then they can work out the work within themselves. Duration of a task determines work hours or vice versa. So sometimes you know exactly how much this task is going to take. And based on that, you allocate the work hours. But sometimes you need to calculate the work hours to finishing that task. And based on that, you can calculate the duration of a specific task. One thing that you need to remember, don't overload human resources and be flexible in the timing of task based on the resources available. Um, this is another thing that you need to keep in mind that at the end of the day, they are humans, so don't put extra pressure on anyone and be flexible in the finishing time for each task. In most of companies, overtime is available opposite the, so it depends on the nature of the company. So if the reason the culture is to have overtime, then it's okay. So you can allocate for that. So as a project manager, it's always a good practice to know the culture of the company and what is available. So you can find it out by talking to the senior managers. And if you're also part of the company, you already know that. Okay, project milestones. Project milestone is a task of zero duration that shows an important achievement in a project. So it's not a particular task, but is a kind of a deliverables. After finishing a few tasks, you achieve something, and it's a milestone of your project. So you can say like, you know, the deliverable one has been done, so the milestone one is finished. So the milestone should represent a clear sequence of events that incrementally build up until your project is complete. So you got few milestones within your project, can be like based on timeline. So you want to put milestones every quarter or something like that, and based on that, you manage your task and duration, or it's going to be based on when and a specific element of your project or a specific delivery is completed and it's ready, that can be one milestone. And you got few milestones in your project. It's not just one milestone, and the combination of these milestones gives you the final objective of your project. Also, completing a milestone is a good time for a progress report to the stakeholders. So it's the best time after finishing one milestone. You can set up a meeting and present the work that has been done to the stakeholders based on your communication plan, and also provide the reports. One thing that is you need to have is a Gantt chart. So Gantt chart shows the activities, task, or event displaying against time. So it gives you the timeline. So for example, all the work breakdown structures and the duration of each work element, start, and then you can see it all in one screen. You can use it Excel file for that. This is going to be probably the simplest version. You can use Microsoft Project for that, which is going to be more advanced. And also there are some online tools to create Gantt chart as well. So Gantt charts are most commonly used for tracking project schedules. So you can see that if any task is overdue or over budget, you can track it down and see that what you can do. So it's the tool that the project manager should have. Also, the Gantt chart shows the task dependency. So you can see, like, for example, this task is finished to start. This task also is finished to start. And the other task also you can see here. All the task dependencies are shown by arrows. And also you can see the percentage of completion. So this line here, you can see that's the completion percentage. And also you can see the assigned resources and budget for each task. So unfortunately, you cannot have free access to Microsoft Project as a student uh, based on the university policy, but if you're interested in order to learn it better, perhaps you can get the license yourself. And there are some online training that you can also take for Microsoft Project. But anyway, the concept is the same as long as you learn it, even like using Excel file or some online tools, and you can apply it to Microsoft Project quite easily. So Emiliana said that in computer labs you can find it. I'm not aware of it, but if you've seen it, you can use it. I don't think that in my Access UNSW, students can, based on what I know from last year, but it maybe the policy has changed, so you can also check it. Any suggested online training you could recommend? Uh, there is a one in LinkedIn Learning that you can use for Microsoft Project Learning. So that's if you're a subscriber to LinkedIn Learning, you can use that. Also, there are some the other ones that you can use. Perhaps one is the on Udemy that you can also use that. I can, if you send me an email, I can share with you the details of those, so you can use. Okay, I think that's perhaps before going to other things about the lead time and lag time and float, etc. Maybe it's a good time to have a 10 minutes break, and we start at around 2:05. Okay, so let's continue. We need to discuss about lead time and lag time. So lead time is the amount of time whereby a successor activity can be advanced with respect to the predecessor. So you can see you completed the plasterboard of the ground floor. You can start painting it while the plasterboard work on the first floor continues. So it means that not necessarily you need to completely finish a task in order to start another task which is dependent on that. So painting is dependent on the installation of the plasterboard, but you don't need to necessarily to completely finish the plasterboards in order to start painting. So there is a lead time here, and the lead time can be different. So it can't like the predecessor can be like up to 90% or 95% of the predecessor time. Or it can be just only 5 or 10%. So this is depends on the nature of the project and the job that you're doing. But there are some lead time, and this lead time is very good, especially if you want to shorten the project. That can help. But you need also to see that if you got enough resources in order to do that. If the plasterboarding and painting is going to be done by just only one person, then perhaps you don't have any lead time for that particular job. But if it's a different people are doing two different jobs, then perhaps you can use that in order to finish the project sooner. Okay, so what about lag time? So lag time is the amount of time whereby a successor activity is required to be delayed with respect to a predecessor activity. So after finishing a one task, you need to wait a specific amount of time in before starting the successor activity. So the first activity can be applying a primer coating on a wall, and so you need to wait until the first coating is going to be dry, the primer coating is going to be dry, and then you can apply the second brush of paint. So you need to have this lag time. And also depend on the job, this lag time can be also different. Okay. Another thing is about float or slack, also known as a slack. So float measures the amount of time which a particular activity's performance can be delayed while still permitting the project to be completed within the scheduled time frame. So which means that one of the tasks can be delayed without affecting the total project duration. Uh, Another way to look at float is as a measure of criticality. So the more float an activity has, the less critical the activity, which means that this particular activity or task can be completed or started at floating time. So it doesn't affect the project duration that much. So there are some classification of floats. So we got free float. The free float of an activity is the amount by which an activity can be delayed without delaying the earlier start of any following activity. So it means that you got all the tasks, and one task is which the predecessor of another task can be delayed for a specific amount of time, and that a specific amount of time that you can delay it, that predecessor task is called the free float. Got also the total float. So total float calculated by subtracting the earliest start time and duration from the activity's late finish time. It's a bit complicated. Let me explain it in this figure. So you got two paths, one path from A to F. As you can see, all the activities need to started after finishing of another activity. So there is not much room or float, free float. But another pass, you got this task G and H. So you can see that there is a 5 days in between, after finishing of task G, you got 5 days before starting of task H. So these 5 days, it means the free float, which means that you can delay the task G 5 days without affecting the start day of task H as planned. So this is your free float for task G. And for task H, the free float is 3 days. So after task H and before starting of task F, you can see you got 3 days, which you can delay task H before delaying the start of the task F. So this is the free float of task H. So this is perhaps easier to understand, but let's have a look at the total float. So total float means that, let's say that you can have these 5 days of float, but you can also have access to these 3 days as well. So you can delay this task 5 days and also use some of the free float of task H. So you can delay task G up to 8 days and also delay task H, a start date of the task H by 3 days. So you got the total float of task H. Let me draw on the screen. So perhaps, okay. So we had task G, I'm terrible at this, and you got task H. So then you got 5 days here, and then you got 3 days here. So this is the free float for task G and free float for task H. So another way that you can do it, and this is going to be task F. So in order for total float of task G, so you assume that you can uh, start task H later, and just you don't have enough time to delay task H. So after finishing of task H, you need to start task F, but you can use that time. So this is going to be the total float, which is going to be 8 days for the total float of task G. So this is the way that the task G total float is calculated. So the same thing for task H. So it's going to be 3 days. But the total float for task H is also going to be 3 days because you cannot delay task F further. But if you can, if you allowed to start task H earlier, sometimes you cannot start task H earlier, but if you can allow task H earlier, so you can put task H here, then you can allow the total float of 8 days for task H as well. But because most of the time you're not allowed to start it perhaps earlier, so the total float is going to be only the 3 days, the same as the free float. Okay. I can hear a lot of questions happening in the chat box, so let me go back to the chat box. Yep, the late finish. So total float, late finish, earliest start minus duration. Can we use late finish minus early finish for total float? Late finish minus early finish. So you got late finish minus early start minus duration. Not sure. I need to think about it, but so you got light finish. Yep. Let me think about it later. This doesn't put task H on risk or on critical pass. The critical pass is the pass that is with, I'll get back to that. So it doesn't change the critical pass. But yes, if the task H is get delayed, then yes, it can uh, potentially delay the completion of task F. So that's another thing. Okay, so let's move on. So what are the benefits of identifying and monitoring free float and total float for the project manager? Yes, the free float is no more than total float. So avoiding delays in project delivery, efficiency, room for adjustment, prioritizing, time management. So all these things are important in order to understand the free float and total float. So after doing all the task dependency, it's a good practice to find out what kind of float do you have and how you can work around that in order to uh, give you some time to finish the project on time. Okay, thank you. So realistic schedule, make sure you consider public holidays. So when you do the project planning, you need to have a look at the public holidays and make sure, for example, if your project is going to be a start of like December and finishing on April. So you need to look at the public holidays during the Christmas time and how much how for how long the staff are not available, and also you need to look at the annual leave or sick leave. So if they're getting annual leave and sick leave, you need to also consider on that as well. If they are casual, perhaps you don't need to do that. But if there are uh, full-time or part-time staff, you need to allocate some extra time for those leaves as well. You need also to look at the staff appointment. Are they part-time or full-time? So make sure don't expect the job to be finished at the same time for a part-time person compared to a full-time person. And also percentage of time allocated to the project for each team member because they might have other things to do. Not always they dedicated 100% of the time to the project. And also be realistic about working hours per day. So although that working hours on paper can be like 7.5 hours or 8 hours, or depends on the companies, but you need to see that what is the effective working hours? Is it 5 hours, 6 hours? So based on that, be realistic in terms of the task duration. And sometimes some companies, for example, they don't work on Friday afternoons, or the culture is different. So you also need to consider that as well. So experience of the team member is also important. So if you got a very experienced member for doing a task, then perhaps it can take less time. But if it's the person is a beginner, you need to allocate more time or some time for training, induction, etc. And also any recruitment, procurement of materials and shipment needs to be considered as well. Um, The other thing is that don't overload a member with many tasks at the same time, so that which are going to reduce its productivity. And observe and adapt to workplace culture. As I mentioned, they might not work in a specific time of the day, or they may have some breaks, or the other things. So this need to be considered as well. Activities should not be so small as to unnecessary or complicate or lengthen the schedule. So there should be an appropriate time and task that needs to be done during that. So this is another thing that you need to keep in mind. An activity should not be so large that the work cannot be controlled. And if you put an activity which is very large and you need to specify a lot of time, but the thing is that you cannot control it. So if say like the activity is large and you say that it's going to take 1 month to finish, but how you want to control it from first week to the last week? And how you can say like how much is going to be finished. So it's better to, if it's possible, to break down this large work into smaller pieces so you can better track it, so when each task is going to be finished. So finishing up all those smaller tasks can result in finishing off the bigger task. Okay, critical path is very important in project management and scheduling, so please pay attention here. So critical path is the longest sequence of tasks in your schedule. So any delays in critical path delay the completion of the time project. So let's have a look at this figure to see that's what is the critical path. As you can see, there are different tasks needs to be done, and each of those tasks can take days. For example, task A is 2 days, task C is 3 days, and as you can see, the other task. And there are some dependencies as well. As you can see, you need to finish task 4 before task 2 and task 5 before task 4, etc. And also, there are some paths that you need to take. So for example, this is one pass, 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 8. This is another pass, 1, 3, 5, 7, 8. And this is another pass, 1, 3, 6, 7, 8. So for each pass, you calculate how much is going to be the duration based on these task dependencies. And the longest sequence of tasks is your critical path. As you can see, this 1, 3, 6, 7, 8, it takes 25 days, which is larger than the other two passes that we got here. So this pass and also this pass. So this is going to be our critical pass, which means that if we delay any task of B, D, G, or I, then the project is going to be delayed at the same time. But if the tasks are not in the critical path, if it get delayed, we still can manage to finish the project on time if the delay is not larger than the critical path, which means, for example, we got 25 days for pass 3, and this is compared to 14 days of pass 1. So if the pass 1 can be delayed 11 days, we still can manage to finish pass 3 on finish the project within 25 days. Okay, there are some recommendations for better scheduling. So schedule tasks with limited resources first, so it will be less likely to delay your project. So it means that you got some tasks that you got limited resources for doing those tasks. So and if you put those tasks at the end of the project, then perhaps you cannot find the resources and the project can get delayed. But if you start those tasks earlier, then perhaps there's a less chance of delaying your project. A scheduled tasks to occur as last as possible, so you don't need to have to spend resources early. You can start it earlier than the schedule if required. So it means that You don't need to necessarily to start the task, and when, for example, you need to pay the employees when it's not required. So it means that the task, there is something that needs to be done in order to start the task, but it's still at the same time you're paying the employee because your start time is sometime that you mentioned before finishing of the other task. So that means that you spend resources early. Use time buffers, for example, extra time for summary tasks or before completion of the project for managing delays. So always is a good example to spend more time at the end or at the finishing of some summary tasks so you can delay the project. So if I get back to this, so perhaps the best way in order to add extra time is going to be here. So if any of those tasks is going to get delayed, so you got some extra time year in order to finish the project on time. For some techniques, in order to shorten project schedule, one of this is the fast tracking. So fast tracking adds overlap with two tasks that the successor does not necessarily needs to be started after finishing of the predecessor. So which means that you can start this task earlier. You can have some lead time here, as we discussed before, and then you can start this task earlier, so you got more time, and you can also shorten the project schedule. If it can be done on the critical path, then the project gets shorter. However, you need to consider that there are some risks, such as redoing or failed dependencies and miscommunication. So, for example, um, you need to complete this task in order to start this task, but you can start it earlier. But if this task uh, are there are some elements of it that needs to be completed before this start time, which means that you allocated the resources here, but these resources cannot start the job, which means that you allocated time and budget to this task to be started earlier, but physically they cannot start the job because there are some elements of this task need to be finished. And this is the fault of the project manager, and he's going to spend a lot of time and budget of and resources here. So this is another thing that you need to be mindful of that. The other thing for shortening the project schedule is going to be cutting the scope if it's applicable. It can also result in shortening the critical path if the some of that scope is in the critical path. The other common method is crashing. So crashing means that spending additional money and more resources, for example, more staff working on a particular work element in order to fast track delivery of that work and also shorten the task duration and the schedule. If it can be done in the critical path, then the project can get shorter. You need to find a task that can be shortened in the critical path with least amount of money spent. So this is important. So which task you're going to crash? Some tasks, if you want to crash it, you need the resources that are more expensive. Some tasks can do it quicker with less amount of money. So perhaps for the crashing, you choose the task with a less amount of money spent. You start with least expensive task to crash by calculating cost per week for each critical task. So first of all, you want to crash some task in the critical path. This is the way that you can shorten the project. But which task? You look at the cost for crashing of each task per week. So for example, if one task can be reduced by 1 week or maybe 1 day, how much is going to be cost? And then you compare it for different tasks. So for example, the cost of the crashing per 1 week for one task is $1,000. Another task for crashing it for 1 week is going to be $2,000 because they're going to both shorten the total time of the project for 1 week. You probably choose, you definitely choose the one with lower cost. The other thing is that adding more people does not always shorten a task. So if you, for example, put an experienced person or new member to team of experienced people, then probably it's not going to be shortened because the other people need to spend some time to train the new team member. But if you use a very experienced and very knowledgeable person in order to crash the test, although that the cost of that person is going to be higher, but it's definitely is going to be effective. Okay, we got a question here. Flexibility time, flexibility. I didn't get your question. Anyway, let's move on. So this graph shows you the duration versus the direct cost of a job if you want to do it in a normal way or if you want to crash it. So you need to read it from right to left. If you want to do it in a normal way, the cost is going to be lower, but the duration is going to be higher. But if you start to crash it based on the resources that you allocate, the duration can get shorter, but the cost is going to increase. But you need to remember that there is going to be some time that's required for doing the task. Although if you can increase the number of people working on this, you cannot shorten the duration of task lower than that. So it means that there's a maximum amount of resources that you can provide in order to effectively crash a task. Other than that, you just increase your cost without affecting the duration or shortening the project. So this is another thing that you need to keep in mind. The other thing that's about your human resources. So you got the aggregated workload and also you got the project duration. So for example, here that you can see that the start of the project, you got some workload and then your workload is getting reduced for another task with a longer duration, but suddenly you got a task that needs to be done quickly, but you need to use a lot of workload and then it's again. So this is kind of fluctuating workload versus the project duration. So most of all, as a project manager, you want to level it off. So make sure that your workload is going to be smoothly at the same level during the project. So one question is that if crashing fails, can we schedule another crashing? Yes, you can, but you need to make sure that sometimes there is a limited time that you have. So you need to make sure that the first crashing is going to be as effective as possible. So one way to leveling the workload, for example, here, so this dashed line was the before leveling. As you can see, there is a short period of time with a lot of workload, and here was a long period of time with minimum workload. So what you can do, you can just probably assign more duration here in order to finish the task and assign some of the workload in order to finish this task, if possible, in a shorter amount of time. So that's kind of, you can just level it somehow, your workload compared to the previous version. And this way, you can have a better workload and smooth workload during your project. So what are the advantages? The advantage is that there is going to be less hands-on management required because if you got a very short amount of time with a lot of work loads and a lot of people working on a task at the same time, it's going to be a lot of miscommunication and pressure on the staff, etc., and also on the management. So you want to avoid that. Also, it's improved the staff morale because they don't need to rush to finish a thing, and also sometimes, for example, they know like the work that they're going to do each day is going to be more or less at the same time. So there's not going to be some weeks that with a lot of work, some weeks with a shorter amount of work. And fear personal problem, as I mentioned. So when you want to finish the task in a short duration, there's going to be a lot of stress on the staff and less hiring and firing costs. So all in, all out. So if we can, for example, have 3 people working on the project, all through the project from start to finish, doing different tasks, it would be much better than to start with 10 people at the first month and then you fire 5 of them for the next 6 months, and then you start hiring another 10 people, in order to manage the workload. So this is another thing. What is the difference? So, okay, the first question, what if there is a resource limit? So that's another thing. If there is a resource limit, perhaps cannot do it, but as a project manager, if you have ability to do that, and also the task dependency, sometimes because of the task dependency, you cannot do it. But if there's any possibility, it's good to do the work leveling. So the second question, what is the difference between resource leveling and resource smoothing? Which one we perform first? I don't think that there is any difference between these two. So as long as you can have a manageable resources that you can have from a start to finishing of the project, so you can distribute the task evenly to your resources, then it's good practice to do as a project manager. Okay, so you're going to have our first bonus point, bonus mark question. So just saying that the rules are going to, you need to answer the question on a Slido and also provide your ZID. So if you don't provide your ZID, I cannot recognize you to give you a bonus mark. So there's going to be 1 bonus mark for this question, and the first 3 person that answer this question correctly, they get each 1 bonus mark. Are you ready? And please only answer the question on a Slido. Don't answer any question on the chat box in Blackboard Ultra. So here's the question. So we got this network diagram of the task needs to be finished. So we got the task duration and number of workers. So task A has got 2 days of duration and there are 2 workers on that. Task C, we got 5 days duration and 4 workers. And task B, we got 3 days duration and 2 workers working on that. As you can see, the project can be finished on 5 days based on this task C, which is the longest task. And this is your workers, the number of workers based on this diagram and this kind of activity. And you can see that the first 2 days is going to be very busy, and then you got getting less busy towards the end of the project, which is a small project, only takes 5 days. So how we can level out this project? So please answer on a Slido. The first 3 person that answered correctly, give 1 bonus mark. Okay, so we got all the three people that answered the question correctly. So please do not answer it more. Okay, so we got three right answers. So Z5275 and Z5227907 and Z5269 Okay, so let me show you the solution. So what we can do, we can either put task A or task B delayed. So in this scenario, you can delay the task B after finishing of task A. So you can see that in this way, you only have 6 workers throughout the 5 days, and task A and task B can finish after each other. Or you can start task B and then task A. The reason for that, because none of these A, B, or C tasks are dependent on each other. So it means that it doesn't matter if you start task A first or task B first, or we can start task C at the same time of task A or task B. And with this, we can level out the workers during the 5 days of the project. Okay. So you need to answer the question on a Slido on the question and answer section. You don't need to have the Slido QR, so you just use the CVN9731 as hashtag CVN9731. We also need to consider the list hiring and firings. So in that way, you only have 6 workers, considering that this task can be done by all these workers. So you may answer the question correct, but based on the timeline that the answer is pop up on the Slido, so the first 3% gets the marks, only the first 3%, not all the people. You may answer the question correctly, but I cannot give the marks to all. It's only the first 3% that answered correctly. Okay, thank you. So let's move on. What factors may limit PM's ability to level resources? So number of resources, shift worker, lack of experience, technical knowledge, resource limit, availability of resources, resource shortage, cost. And sometimes the task cannot be done. So there you need to have a specific experienced people in order to do the task. So you cannot give tasks to anyone. So that is a limiting factor. So they need to have enough knowledge. Sometimes is the dependency of the task. The one task needs to finish until another task to be completed, so you cannot change it. And sometimes you cannot uh, make the duration larger because it's going to be part of the critical path, and the duration of the project is going to be increased at the same time. So these are some of the limitations as we discussed. Okay, so that's all about the project plan. So you completed the project plan. So how do you get approval from the project owner slash customer? So the best thing to do is just, as you answered correctly, is to schedule a meeting so you can present the all, not details, but all main elements of the project plan and get their signature. The last part is very important. So you need to get the signature so they know exactly what is the scope of the project, the budget that is associated with the timeline, and everything that is in terms of the deliverables, success criteria, and all those things are important. So when you get their signature, so they approve that. So if they want to do any changes further, so you can refer to what they approved. So you have more leverage in order to avoid any big changes later on. So I'm going to say that it's good to meet key stakeholders, get verbal approval, and then schedule a meeting. That depends on the type of the project. Sometimes some of the stakeholders and owners can be very busy. So the scheduling individual meeting can take some time. So you can do that, but it depends on the project. If sometimes some project you cannot easily get grasp of the project owner and customer, but if they are accessible, so maybe this would be a good practice to first get a verbal approval and then a scheduled meeting and get the signature. Okay, so you've done all the project planning, so you got a project baseline. So project baseline is a collection of approved project documents such as requirement, schedule, budget, task duration, etc. So everything that can be controlled as part of a change management process, which I'm going to discuss later, is included in the project baseline. So any variance from the baseline can be monitored and tracked as project proceeds. So it's, for example, saying that this task needs to finish, start at that time and finish at that time. This is going to be the project duration. So this baseline you can see in the gray. But when you monitor it, you say that this task is get delayed. So now we are here, so the project is a bit delayed. So you compare it versus on baseline. The same thing you can also do in terms of the budget and other resources. So baseline can be used to evaluate project progress and performance. So if there's any delays and over budgeting. The other thing that you need to have after the project plan finishes about the communication plan. So you look at your responsibilities matrix and a stakeholder analysis and provide a table like this, which should, for example, saying the project owner, what we needs to be communicated, perhaps objectives and how in terms of the project plan, monthly status report, closeout reports, and the same thing for other customers, HR manager, team members. So this gives you an idea so how you can communicate the progress of the project after it gets started. The other thing is about the quality management plan. So quality management plan is a roadmap for meeting the objectives. So you need to have some assurance control and standards for quality. So quality assurance plan are processes required to meet the quality standards, for example, reviewing design or testing prototypes as project proceeds. So you need to define how you're going to test the quality of the thing that you're developing. So that is part of the quality assurance plan. The other thing is about quality control, which is measure and monitor the quality of the final deliverables. It is going to be, for example, acceptance tests that you need to, for example, send it to a lab or something, external lab to be tested, or is it going to be a peer review by someone else, or a committee, or is it going to be inspection or audit? So all these things, you describe it as a part of the quality management plan. The other thing is about the quality standards. So any product or services that you develop needs to have a quality standard threshold. So based on that, you decided that these are the features that I'm going to have for this product based on this quality, the start of the project. So anything below the acceptance threshold may not be accepted by customers. So it's going to be the project failure. But the other thing that you need to keep in mind, so you shouldn't aim for exceeding quality standards because it may extend the schedule and increase the cost of the project. So if you can be within the project schedule and within the project cost, you may deliver increase the quality standard for the product. But it's better to avoid it if there is any chance of exceeding the schedule and cost, which that way the customer won't be happy. Okay, and the last one is a change management plan. So you do all the project planning, but it's not going to be ideal. Not everything go as planned, and sometimes the stakeholders or team members requesting some changes to the project plan. So the way that is going to be handled is part of the change management plan. So you identify what you want to control against changes. So if there are any changes requested, are you going to change the schedule, the scope, or whole project plan? And that's you decide as part of the change management plan. So the change management process is going to be receives a change request or by team member or stakeholder. So they want to change the scope or change one of the tasks or one of the deliverables or some additions, some more features, etc. So what you do, you evaluate the change request. So that can be done by the project manager itself or someone assigned by project manager with some skills in order to accurately evaluate the change request and to see that if there is any the change is feasible or not. And also that person identifies any imposed risk or impact on the project time and budget. Then the change request and the assessments by that person is going to be submitted to the change review board, which can be a combination of some key stakeholders, project owner, or project manager, etc. And then they can accept, reject, or revise the change request. So this is an example of form that can be used. For example, the requester, the date submitted, the date by then the change needs to be implemented. Priority, is it important? Is it emergency or is it just low important? Some description, a reason for change, a business justification, for example. If you do that, it's going to be much more benefit at the end of the project and those kind of thing. And then change review board based on decision is going to be approved, rejected, decision date and signature. Okay, so the change management plan, after that, you communicate the decision with the change submitter and apply the change to the baseline document if it's get approved. And you get the change request log, for example, what was the requester, the change request summary, approved, rejected, and what is the impact? Is it going to, for example, extra 10,000 to be spent or 10 days delays? Some important notes is that set a threshold, so you don't need to have to use change management process for every small changes. So you can get the request, but this request can or cannot be get accepted. But you can also have a threshold, so you don't accept all the small change requests. Also create a process for emergency changes that can be urgently reviewed. That's another thing. So there's sometimes some emergency changes. So that's probably you need to set up an emergency board review that can be set up quite quickly, and they can respond to the emergency change requests within 24 hours or so. Okay, so that's all for today. Please ask your question on Slido. Just if you can, if you have any question that is not related to the topic that you're discussing, it would be much better to ask it on a Slido. So that's way I won't miss your question or won't interrupt the lecture. Thank you. Okay, so let me go through back some of the questions. How many questions will we have per Moodle page in the quiz tomorrow? Excessive traffic on the page might lead to slow loading. We have experienced this before with Moodle quiz in previous terms. I'll get back to this. Quiz tomorrow, it's at 6 p.m., yes? It doesn't disappear. I just moderate the question on a Slido. The question and the quiz is going to be on the assessment section on Moodle. So let me go through the questions on a Slido. So one thing is that could you please have at least 5 questions in one Moodle page so we're not wasting time in the loading the question. So I can potentially do that, but let's see that's what other people say. So maybe I can run a poll here. So if the majority want to have that, so then I can change. I'm going to run a poll on Blackboard Ultra, so please hang on. So the scope of exam is going to be the lecture and workshop contents from week 1 to week 3. I think you can't do any changes before the submission. So if you change your mind before submitting, you can change your answer. So we cannot extend it for another 5 minutes. So 15 minutes is going to be more than enough. So probably you only need less than 30 seconds to answer each question. So the questions are pretty short. So 15 minutes is very generous. And in terms of the cheating, you cannot cheat because the question for each of you is going to be different. I think that all question one page. I think I can do that. I'll double check on Moodle, but if the option is available, I will put all questions in one page. So all questions are, there is no short answer, all multiple choices, and true and false. Okay. So it seems that there are no more questions. What is the percentage of multiple choices and true and false? It really doesn't matter for as long as you got know the material. So it really doesn't matter how much is percentage in multiple choice and true and false. No, there is no short answer in questions. So just the people that I got the questions correctly and I just announced their name. If you can please send me an email with your name and ZID, please. I accidentally removed the things from a Slido. So if you can send that to me, I'll have a record of your bonus mark. Thank you. Okay, I think that's all for today. Thank you. I hope that you do good for the quiz. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.